Well, all right, my friends. Hello and welcome to Nostalgia Trap. My name is David Parsons. Thank you for joining me. It is 2024. God knows what is in store for us this year. It's weird because online, I spend a lot of time online, probably too much, just like everybody else. No judgments here. Maybe I'll do better in 2024. But either way, the vibes online about this year seem to have this, a consensus around the idea that this year is going to be something terrible, just an absolute shit show. Very few people being optimistic online, although maybe that's the algorithm that I'm being fed. Either way, it makes me think that there's some sort of there's always some desire there. There's a longing there. There's something like a collective yearning for some sort of cataclysm. It always happens around election years. It seems like the last few election years have been building in their sort of intensity. And the way people, and I say people, I include myself, sort of, put a sort of theatrical power upon these election cycles as if they are television programs, prestige TV shows. I think we've sort of thought about it as season finales of some kind, or maybe shifts in seasons, or different characters being introduced, cliffhangers, all the sort of Joseph Campbell narrative forms that we expect in fiction seem to come out in the election cycles in really particular ways. And Donald Trump's presence has only amplified that. And I can't help thinking that that's what 2024 angst is all about, is sort of anticipating what the presence of Donald Trump will be in 2024. Not only that, but the sort of legion of psychotic zombie followers of Donald Trump, what they're up to. Online right now, they seem to be posting a lot of pictures of themselves with lots of machine guns and missiles and hand grenades and things like that. The kind of psycho edge, prepping for war in 2024. And that's just the domestic end of things. So the whole world seems like it's, prepping itself for a bizarre set of circumstances that no one can predict. I feel like pandemic launched us into this more chaotic moment where the landscape of possibilities is perhaps more pronounced than we anticipated, or at least the more moderate of us anticipated. All I'm saying is that it might be a crazy year. And that's why I'm talking to my guest today. Float Universe is the name of my guest today. I don't have his actual name because he exists online as kind of an online troll. Float Universe is a guy I've been seeing on Instagram for a few years now, talking mostly, ostensibly the account is about flotation tanks and the sort of psychedelic new age implications of flotation tanks. But it's also just a weird meme troll account that I for a lot of reasons wanted to bring on the show and speak with a little bit more, because a lot of the memes are intriguing in the sense that they reflect a certain kind of cultural strand, particularly in American cultural politics. So all that is to say is Float Universe is a weird and funny and intriguing edge of online culture. And I hope you enjoy this conversation. I certainly had fun talking with him. There's lots more Nostalgia Trap stuff out there. I hope you consider joining our Patreon this year. I think we'll be doing the kinds of things that Nostalgia Trap has been doing for many years, which is sort of jumping in on the conversation from sort of different angles. And what I mean by that is we might be talking about the movie Stand By Me, but we're really talking about the sort of gender dynamics at play in the Trumpian Civil War that's unfolding in front of our eyes, or maybe won't be unfolding. We'll see, right? No predictions here, just wild speculation. So that's just to say, join our Patreon, because we will be posting a lot of episodes that are sort of keeping up with what's going on. And I appreciate the support of everyone that is part of that magnificent community. The link to the Patreon community is in the episode description. Check it out. Thanks for being a Nostalgia Trap listener and enjoy this conversation. Here is me talking with Float Universe. All right, my friends, I'm sitting here with one of the foremost meme influencer slash internet creators slash online guys that I see a lot, actually, and I'm glad to actually speak to you because I don't know, you come as an online person that like scrolls through social media, you come across weird shit all the time. But your stuff sticks out for a lot of different reasons, and I kind of wanted to talk with you about why, because I don't know why it does. I think there are different reasons. There are a couple different obsessions that are on your page that probably link up with some of the things we talk about on this show. But should I call you Float,
Interesting.
Mister Universe?
Yeah,
What should I
that's
call
that
you?
float's the best.
I'll call you Float.
I didn't expect for that to be a thing in my life, but you know it always rise back to the surface is one way to look at it. But yeah, float's perfect. Thank you.
How did so okay, for those that don't know you, I want to introduce you a little bit. How I know you. As a page on Instagram called Float Universe that is sort of seems generally connected to the world of I don't know, stoner culture, new age culture, online occult stuff, but like the primary gimmick it seems like of your account is about flotation tanks, which are I sort of connected to that culture. I want to know like how you got into floating as like a way of life, as a kind of way of
Absolutely.
negotiating life. Where did floating enter your story?
Well, they're all linked together, obviously. At some point, we'll get to that. But this started out in a search for stillness, and I felt like something had. At the time, I would describe it as aliens. Now I don't know what it is. Maybe something of a higher spiritual order, another dimension, maybe angelic. But voices telling me I need to, for one thing, omega threes. I don't know why, but it's like we got to build your brain up.
Hmm.
I'm like, all right. I wasn't living like a horrible existence prior to floating. I think I would live maybe just slightly above the average American like existence. This was
Mm-hmm.
in 2014 when this really came across my radar as a possibility.
Okay.
So I didn't seek out looking for floating. This starts out looking for like what, these kind of spiritual things happening to me.
Mm.
And it's trying to ask like questions of like, what is, why am I here? What's existence? Like there are more important things than Grand Theft Auto 5 and The Sopranos and
Sure.
all this other stuff that just it constantly invades our awareness. And so in the search for stillness, because I realized initially I was trying meditation, and it's really kind of started with YouTube, hypnosis videos,
Mm.
self hypnosis videos. Those were
Yeah.
the really key things because I was trying to like meditate and attain these mystical experiences and access these dimensions naturally, but I was racked in so much pain. I'd logged like at that time maybe 12 years as a wedding photographer full time, traveling a lot of
No
it.
shit. Wow.
And so yeah, and so I racked up thousands of miles with like two cameras around my neck and
Hmm.
lots of sitting in front of a computer and editing, all things I liked, but I ultimately began to really hate towards the end. And so yeah, there was this just point where these things started to happen. And next thing I know, I'm like, oh, I want to meditate, but it's so hard to sit still. I have so many, I had tics at the time, like, just like you sit there. Can you sit perfectly still for an extended period of time and not have your mind go crazy and your body just have all kinds of like, it
I had
can't
a
sit
hard
still or you
time.
got like,
I had a hard time doing that before the internet, dude. Like before the internet like wrecked my ability to like have any kind of attention span or like sit still. I think that I found meditation hard. I was into this culture before social media, and I always found it
mm-hmm.
really difficult to do exactly what you're saying, which is sort of like do nothing. It's hard to do nothing.
It's hard, especially when you're just getting off that road, going so fast mentally, like most of us are, just completely bombarded around every corner with the phone,
Yeah.
media everywhere, advertising, just the culture itself is, like Terrence McKenna would say, is not your culture is not your friend.
When did you get
It's
into
willing
Terrence McKenna? When did that guy cross your radar?
that came in. So everything came in the door with floating. So let me
Yeah.
continue
Sorry, I
with like,
interrupted the
okay,
biography.
oh no, it's fine. I'm glad I can do these things and remember the narrative. When I first started podcasting, I would start telling stories and I'd forget where I was going or I'd meander.
All right, we'll take
Um,
it. We'll take it piece by piece.
yeah, because they're all interconnected. And I think they're all important. Now that I'm actually sitting here thinking about it, because I haven't thought about this since this. I mean, I haven't done an interview like this in probably over a year, so I usually don't think about like the genesis of all these things. Oddly enough, this tank's actual name is the Genesis. So, but this wasn't the first float tank actually. And so it's interesting we're doing this podcast because I'm also working on a documentary of the 2 years I spent living at the Float Center, which we'll get to.
Cool.
But yeah, I discovered floating in a search for like inner peace, stillness, doing YouTube videos. I found ones where I could lay back and get hypnotized, and I would experience mystical states. I'm like, okay, so there is something to this. As a basically a hedonistic, um, quasi Christian, prior to these experiences, which ultimately, long story short, led to embracing that almost even more,
Mm.
Christianity and from a different perspective. But all these YouTube videos, I'm like, you know what? I kept searching for ways to become still and like quiet rooms and things like that. Like understanding from the books I was reading, the experiences I was having, that stillness is the key. And it's hard to get there with this culture, the diet, just the way our bodies have kind of been, you know.
Hmm.
Anyway, long story short, I start searching for Zen, but I'm not going to say the name of this place because first of all, the way the story ends is I can't really disparage the place, even though they just literally shut down after almost 10 years.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah,
so
no
yeah,
worries.
it's
We
a
don't
whole.
need to get into any of the lawsuits.
Oh no, it's good. It's just so I was searching for a certain type of meditation, and it led to this me finding this place
Hmm.
where that was part of the name, and it was like 10 minutes from the house. 10 minutes where I was living at the time. I'm like, oh my god, I can, because I had read about John Lilly. You know, I'm sure. Have you heard of John Lilly before?
No, huh?
John Lilly is the creator of this, not this float tank, but float tanks as a concept in
Okay.
general. He's the pioneer. He's the Tim Leary. He's the Terrence McKenna of this float world.
Mm.
He's also famous for LSD with dolphins, ketamine. But
I'm
he,
sure I've come across the guy at some point
he's
in high
if there was a
times or one of
Mount
those places.
if there was a Mount Rushmore of psychedelic figures, he would probably be first ballot, first set of four faces. He'd be probably on there with Terrence McKenna, and I don't know who else you would put on there. Tim
Uh,
Leary.
are Cheech and Chong one guy or two? That's
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
they can count as one.
Hmm.
But exactly. So I've always wanted to float because I'd read about it, and I'd only done mushrooms, I think, twice before I
Hmm.
found floating. And this was late 30s on discovering this. Um, so I had done a little bit of psychedelics prior to this float tank experience, but this again like opened the gateway to all that stuff.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I find this place, I start to float. It changes my mind. It just blows my mind away. It's so amazing. I get so much physical benefit out of it too. And this is what really led to a lot of deep understandings about unconsciousness and like I'm laying in this water. And so to explain what floating is for people that don't know, this tank behind me, similar tanks, um, the whole point is to get dark, still, and you float. And if the buoyancy is done right in the tank with the Epsom salt, you float perfectly. And you get to a point where you lose all bit of body awareness, especially if you're not wearing anything. So I recommend people that are floating, no underwear, no bathing suit, nothing restrictive around your arms or head. You gotta have, you gotta let go.
Mm.
And so that's a big tip. People will sometimes are apprehensive because you are coming in here to get naked,
Mm.
and I mean full naked. So yeah, you when you float, you come in, you take a quick shower. I recommend you dry your face off extensively. I absolutely would recommend don't get it wet at all. But if you have to wash your face for whatever reason before you get in, make sure it's completely dry. You're going to lay in this water here behind me for an hour to 90 minutes. You're in 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt. That's 20, 50-pound bags. That's a lot of it costs like $1,000 to refill this tank if we had to, if somebody went to the bathroom
Hmm.
in it, or you can
Right.
filter the urine out, but a code brown, especially if it's diarrhea. Luckily, I've never experienced that, but um,
Do
so
you?
anyway, you're laying in this water. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to hear what happens because I can sort of imagine what happens. I've never done this, but I mean, I'm in part interested in it in part because I think as a kid, especially, I was able to access a sort of similar psychedelic space without drugs. And I think, I mean, this has
Hmm.
been in the psychedelic discourse for a while. I think people talk about the sort of like psychedelic drug experience being, a way to rediscover that kind of thing you lost from when you were young, that ability to sort of like, I don't know, even hallucinate or imagine or
Yeah,
kind of
like a
let
magical
your
dream space.
yeah, and
Hmm.
and melt the sort of the wall between whatever ordinary reality is and this sort of like magical space is. Kids can do that. And I feel like I could really do that, but it is something that kind of went away over time. And yeah, when I recently discovered psychedelics in college, that was the immediate association I had was like, oh, this is like kind of teaching me or actually just relearning and making me remember how to access this space or that this space exists. So I
Right.
don't know. I'm sure you think of flotation tanks, or I don't know if you would agree, but it seems like they're a similar technology. They kind of like allow you to
Right. Well, they
access
can allow
that
you to get
door.
into access that space quickly. Like I would say, it's you can do an hour, a couple hours, a couple days in a row. At that point, you should be able to access the same spaces if you're told right and your expectations are at a certain level. But you can attain like the space of a meditator who's done it for 10 years, some guy that's been in a cave for like 5, actively doing this because you're again when you're laying there naked in 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt, it's heated to a 93.5 degrees Fahrenheit temperature. That's your skin's average temperature. So you're naked. There's no restrictions on the body. You're floating effortlessly. It's more dense than the Dead Sea or the Great Salt Lake. It's got like a viscosity of like almost motor oil.
Mm,
It feels it's its own body experience. And jumping ahead, like one of the best psychedelics to do in the float tank is probably MDMA or edibles, which I think is why it's Joe Rogan's favorite.
mm,
It's more of a body sensory experience on those psychedelics versus more the mental experience of LSD, which of course can be physical, but I recommend LSD as a meditator's drug, as the way to bust the door inward and outward versus, having sex or doing other things on LSD that are sensory experiences, which are great, I think, but I think LSD is a meditator's drug. So float tank and LSD, I think, go together like peanut butter and jelly. And that's a lot of things people in the float community won't talk about because they're actively involved in promoting the business and they don't want to have clients come in blasted out of their minds. And I rode that line for 2 years, running that meme page, basically promoting them through humor. And sometimes that would be fair
right,
warning. It would be
right.
memes about the downsides, or it's not just me promoting psychedelics or floating 100. I'm a critic of even the float tank, and I say things that people can't say or won't say because they have, they own and operate these things and they want to be perceived a certain way.
That's interesting.
But the float tank
Yeah.
does have a interesting history. Like I said, John Lilly, and this guy gets into the government stuff too later, MK Ultra. But he's famously known for
It
giving LSD to
always comes back
dolphins.
to MK Ultra. I feel like every psychedelic
Yeah,
story ends with the CIA experiments.
but this movie was featured, or this float tank was featured in the movie Altered States, not the one behind me, but the concept of floating in general.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
great movie. I recommend
From the
Altered States. I think
70s, right? Is that John Hurt?
it's Hurt, and it's I think it's 1980.
1980. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I could be wrong, but
Yeah, that's a
um,
horrific movie, dude.
yeah, and it's all about floating. So it can be a little off-putting if you're interested in doing it. Maybe watch it after you understand what floating is. And there's lots of ways and lots of things you can get out of it. I mean, the immediate benefit of floating for anybody off the street is the physical lack of gravity and the Epsom salt, which is full of magnesium, soaking and soaking into the skin. When people take an Epsom salt bath at home, what do they put, like a pound? This
Mm,
is 1,000 pounds.
mm,
Okay. This is something you couldn't do at home because it's too expensive. The water has to be heated. If the water, after a certain time, like for example, we had hurricanes come through because this is in Central Florida, you'd
mm-hmm.
knock out the power for a week, and the temperature drops in these tanks. And so we were heating them with aquarium heaters off a generator. Or what'll happen is, and this happened when you put them in trash cans to like clean the water, it crystallizes. And it can crystallize as hard as like almost a diamond. Because
Mm.
I remember when we took over this place, all the guys that owned it prior to us taking over and me moving in, they didn't take care of it. And so the piping was so like when it leaks, it
Right.
just starts building a giant casket around itself.
Right.
It just encases itself in harder and harder salt. So you can either get a pickaxe or you can melt it back with hot water. So that's the secret. But yeah, man, it's a whole world running a float tank, and it's
I wonder
expensive.
what is the connection? It seems like that there's a sort of troubled connection between float culture and drug culture, because it seems like, yeah, they go together naturally, like peanut butter and jelly, you say, but at the same time they can't really. And it seems like it's kind of like that's a difficult tension. It seems like when you're running a business and you're trying to kind of like ride
Right.
that
Well, that's the
ride that
thing.
line, I guess.
Well, that's why we would offer floating at night, overnight floats. You really have to, okay, so I talk about this a lot. The float tank experience lives or dies with the operator, the person that's there day to day, not only keeping the facility clean, because I don't know about you, but a lot of people don't know 1,000 pounds, especially with a few tanks, thousands of pounds of Epsom salt being, absorbed into the air. It crystallizes in the air conditioner. You have to have dehumidifiers, and it can get salty. That salt is as slippery as black ice, and
Well, it seems like
it's
just
a
like
lot.
this psychedelic experience, you need a good guide, right?
Well, that's the other part. It's like you have to have the right person, which is why you would see people like me, which are rare, but there are people that operate tanks outside of the commercial world where you could, if you know where to look, who to talk to, or if they find you somehow magically, they exist.
The black
People have
market
them in their houses.
flotation
Yeah, yeah.
world.
There's a
Yeah,
little bit of that,
I'm sure.
but because again, it's not worth it to an owner operator to invite that element openly, unless you're in a place like Oregon, which is like Portland and all that. Well, and there's other states. California is probably a little bit more permissive. And then again, you got people like me down in Florida where it's not as embraced as it is on the West Coast. But I was willing at the time to encourage it and run the risk. But mainly, we would do those kind of things at night where there
Hmm.
was no interactions with any other customer. It's hard you can't come in on LSD in the middle of the day unless you reserve all the tanks, or you can, like, it's so unpredictable.
It's so
One of
hard
the
to
stories I've
time
told
something
is,
like that too, right? Like to me, like
well,
every time
that's
I've
the thing.
taken
Like,
LSD, the most interesting parts of it are always at random times. The 5.5 hour mark, the 10 hour
well,
mark.
that's the thing. Exactly. They're impossible to gauge where it's going to go, how long it's going to last, or the intensity of it. Even if you're a pro, they just are. They're just tricksters in that general sense, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
And so I had an experience where two guys came in at the same time. They were friends, and they didn't tell me at the time, but they were kind of weird when they came in,
Mm.
and they filled out the forms, and they were there for quite a bit of time. They had done, like, I think they were each going to do 2 hour floats. I'm like, all right, cool. First time float 2 hours. That's pretty hardcore. Um, And then 15 minutes into the float, one of the guy comes out and he is tripping balls and he needs a trip sitter. Now, luckily, this float center also had like a yoga room where I actually, like I said, lived in for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So we had it set up where somebody could just chill out there alone. Obviously, unless there was a yoga class, but lucky for him, there was no yoga classes at the time. And so I had to trip sit this guy. And then his friend comes out after 2 hours and he's riding the wave, but he's handling it and he's holding his shit in, and he had a good time. And he's still tripping, of course, but not as intense. Well, this is the guy that's tripping his balls off drove. So I had to babysit these guys for a couple more hours until the one guy came to a point where he could drive. I'm like,
Dude.
and the
Yeah.
thing is, people would sneak edibles all the time, or every once in a while I smell somebody smoking weed. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times they're like, I didn't smoke. I'm like, well, I smell weed. They're like, it's released through your skin when you're floating, like that you ate the edible. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it
Yeah.
smells like an edible in there, but it's because
Right.
it, like when you drink, you can smell somebody that's been drinking a lot when they
Sure.
sweat or they pee.
Yeah. I once was in a Thai restaurant and ate so much spicy food that the smell of weed just overwhelmed the whole place because I was sweating it out. And
Yeah.
it just
Oh
kind of
yeah.
felt like it. I mean, it seemed like someone was
Smell like a
smoking in it.
dispensary now.
So fucking
Yeah.
weird. Yeah, so embarrassing. Um, I wonder like what the connection is with the internet thing is, because like at what point do you start doing like meme culture? And I feel like I've been seeing Float Universe for a couple years now.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
that's right around the start of it. Yeah, exactly. Right around
yeah.
the time I started floating, I I needed a way to express it. I
Hmm.
wanted to talk about the experience I was having, and but I had like a really good photography following at the time, a couple thousand people on my personal page, and then thousands on my Facebook. But anyway, I was a great photographer, but so I didn't want to mix that weird float tank naked drug. It's right in that corner of that drug world too. It's all weird new age stuff. I didn't want to subject my audience. So I said, you know what, I got to create like an alter ego. Let me try this. That's why I created Float Universe, when I started having just these mind blowing experiences. And I needed a place to express either through art or memes, which ultimately became memes because that was the only thing that would ever get traction. The only two things that get traction on Instagram are pictures of women and memes. And since I don't have obviously the woman element to it,
Right.
memes had to be the road I travel. And so once I figured out that unless you're somebody big or you know what I mean, like you to start out, you've got to have either memes or something for the men and women to look at. I guess be a meat market, but
Right.
that's where the memes ultimately came from, through needing to express the psychedelic and floating experiences I was having
Hmm.
without poisoning my the way I was making money at the time, which is the photography business.
And you're not in photography anymore?
Long story short, no. It became between the
I
floating.
always like when I'm ever searching for like career changes, I'm always like, wedding photographer seems like a cool thing, but then it also seems like kind of practically hard in a lot of ways.
I could talk all day about that. That's one thing I've been meaning to talk about on my podcast since I've gotten out of it. I have this ability now to talk about it. That's what I've been doing with the floating, is being more critical of it.
Yeah.
As I'm not in it anymore, I have no
Cool.
skin in the game, so it's like I can talk about people shitting in a float tank without worrying about scaring people off.
So you're, yeah, I'm
Or
glad
my
I got you now
experience,
when you're
people
not
jerking
selling the
off in the float
brand. Yeah.
tank. Exactly. So what was I was about to see something else. What was the question?
We were talking about wedding photography and being a pain in the
Oh,
ass.
the wedding photography.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. I could talk all day about that one. Unbelievable. Um, I don't recommend you do it because you could do it as a side job on every other
I
Saturday
don't really want to
or
do it. I've
something
always
like
been
that.
curious about it.
It's hard because
Yeah.
you're not only is it just you, if you don't work, you don't eat. You are competing against women who are subsidized by their husband to
Mm.
go in. So basically, I never did children or babies or family stuff. I did kind of sometimes to pay the bills, but I was always undercut by these women who had no real skin in the game. Same thing with the weddings. I'd always, I had to get to a point where I was booked out a year in advance. I was really popular in the East Indian community. I did those weddings, and those were bigger paydays because it's like 3 or 4 days versus one day, you
Interesting.
know. And
Yeah.
so there are angles and there are, ways to get in and make money, but it gets harder and harder. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, look, your iPhone can do so much. And if you're good at photography, if you have the proper apps or even lens ads on, you don't need to go with a giant bag of that was the other thing. I had to carry 20, $30,000 of equipment sometimes to Mexico. I learned things about Mexico. You can't bring a certain amount of equipment or they take it. I think it was you can't take more than one or two cameras now, but they keep like so international's tough. You've got to watch this. I called it like the nuclear football, my camera case, because
Hmm.
it's like the most important thing, and it had thousands of images that needed to be edited, and
It
I've
seems
had
like
quite an adventure
there's a
with
lot of
that.
stress in that industry too, because people are expecting a product back from you that like is really
Well,
important to
yeah,
them, and they want it a certain way, and that just seems like a recipe for a lot of stress.
it does. And I my downfall was getting into the albums, which was I can go and take a great picture, and there's no way we can reshoot that, so you're stuck with it. And I never again had any issues with actual photography. I never missed a wedding, never have any real big issues with that. The only issues I did have were the albums I had committed to because it was just a mess.
Mm.
Because
Hmm.
people, I would send a beautiful wedding album edited the way they specified, and they just send it back with more changes, and it just got to a point where that became so backlogged, and it just got bad. And then the pandemic happened. And that was ultimately the final uh, nail in the coffin, which were I had just started slowing down at that point, and then that kind of was, like I said, the last nail because all these events, everything shut down. People had to reschedule their
That's right.
weddings.
Yeah. You
I
don't
said,
even
let me
think
just
about it. The
fully,
industries that crashed because of the pandemic and wedding
yeah,
photography. Yeah, makes sense.
all the wedding stuff, vendors, like cooks cooked less, bride women that do. I know women that almost solely depend on doing women's hair, like for survival. That's all they do is they
Oh
just
yeah,
travel the
but people
country.
people ended up opening their salons anyway, and like
Right.
doing I mean uh doing like home stuff, like going to people's houses and cutting hair. I mean it's interesting because it like just basically like the industries just moved elsewhere. They didn't really go away, I don't think. I mean they did for a minute, but yeah, I'm to me like away from wedding photography and back to floating and like spiritual culture. I don't know. I'm wondering like how your I always like to line up sort of people's spiritual sort of moments in life with the I don't know the wider historical moment. It's funny. It sounds like this is happening to you around 2014.
Mhm.
So like the middle of the Obama years. I remember. I mean, do you remember the 2012 prophecies? Do you remember all that? Like that
Oh
like
yeah, of
the
course.
like Mayan apocalypse. I remember. So someone told me about that in like 1999. And so like in 1999, when I was like a young dude, thinking about 2012 seemed very far away, and it was just like, oh, that'll be like a magical moment, and it was very easy to accept that like, oh, some crazy shit will happen. And like in a lot of ways, like by the time 2012 came, I'd forgotten about the Mayan prophecy in some ways. But it's
Mhm.
weird because it seems like for a lot of people in the 90s, the 2012 prophecy and the Terence McKenna stuff was like a central way of accessing this world that you're like I don't know that is blown up online. And I think Float Universe is one account that sort of demonstrates how weird it all got and how like McKenna was sort of a prophet in a lot of ways and
Oh yeah, he
in sort of
totally.
internet
Yeah,
culture. Yeah.
100%. Now, I did, although this started in 2014, I really, when I looked back at it, because I'm like, what did happen? Was there a shift in 2012? Or some people say, like, oh, that's when they turned on the simulation or they switched channels or whatever. But anyway, I'm looking back at my life and I'm like, you know what? There was a massive shift. I didn't really have the awareness to look back and say, where was the timeline that this really started? It just kind of started happening.
Yeah.
But I realized that there were certain points. And another thing I looked at when I looked at my life was like knocks to the head. Like every time I had a bad accident, my life kind of really took a fork in the road.
Do you mean
Because
like
I look
literal
at,
literal knocks to the head, literal bad accidents?
oh yeah, like car accidents. I'm 6'5". I lived in Japan for a year. I took so many knocks to the head in Japan.
Oh God.
I'm pretty sure I left brain damaged. I'm 6'5", and the doors are like 6 foot. And so if you just barely miss it or you're not aware of it, you have it like the brim of a hat. It is a full on like bam
You were
to the
Bill
front of the
Murray in
head.
Lost in Translation for 5 years, basically.
Yeah, it was quite an experience, but that ultimately led me back to America because I got hit by a car over there in Japan on a bicycle, and that was where I saw this one of those forks in the road, which is why I say to look at your like for people like you're like how did I get this way? Go back and look at points in time where you were traumatized. You know, they say a lot of people stay at that mental age that they're traumatized at,
Sure,
so
yeah.
that's why you'll meet a lot of adults basically acting infantile is they're stuck at 5 or 12, 15, 18, even though they're 40, 60.
I believe it.
Because yeah. So a trauma ultimately, like I came back and I got in this float tank probably 2 years later after that. Or no, it was a few years. I left it. Well, that doesn't matter. The point is, I came back and eventually I floated and laying in that tank and completely still. I noticed that a huge part of my body was like way out of alignment with the rest of it, which I didn't consciously see or feel in my life. And part of me, I think, was I was drinking and I was smoking a ton of weed because I had a lot of physical ailments that I felt justification and relief
Hmm.
to use it.
Yeah.
And so in my unawareness, I didn't realize how jacked up my physical body actually was. I get in the float tank and I start to realize, like, wow, I can't bring this shoulder down. Like, my whole body is relaxed, but this is like on a hook up here. It's like it's hooked to the side of my neck. But I didn't realize it until that moment. Long story short, these floats turned into a membership. I ended up working for the guys there, helping them with their social media and stuff for exchange for floating. So I basically got floating for free for years. And then after that, the guy runs it into the ground, and it wasn't really his fault. It's just people kind of neglect things, and these things degrade fast over time. If upkeep doesn't happen, the salt buildup is immense,
I
and
was
you
gonna
can
say,
tell.
like, first of all, it seems like a really expensive thing to keep up, and also part of it, and I hate to say this, but it seems like it might be a fad, or it might be something that has that, like, it just in terms of pure capitalist reptile market mind, it might have a moment and then it contracts and there's a smaller kind of market for it.
Definitely, that's something I'm glad you brought up because there has been this curve of 2005, 2006. This really the boom starts with Joe Rogan. Joe
Right.
Rogan is the one. Besides, there's a few moments in time where you've got like John Lilly and pre-internet, you didn't have access to all this understanding of like Terrence McKenna and Tim Leary. You had to kind of be in that world, John Lilly, to get that. But now post-internet, all this stuff is available. We all know about these people.
Isn't that's really interesting to me because I mean I think, dude, the way I accessed Terrence McKenna was literally a guy, like a stoner dude I worked with at a restaurant, gave me a CD, and the CD said Terrence McKenna, uh, linear societies and non-linear drugs, and he said go listen to this, bro.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to it, and it was the freakiest lecture I'd really listened to. I mean, if anyone knows Terrence McKenna's voice, it's instantly hypnotic and has a kind of, like, I don't know, authority to it. But yeah, to me, I love that you mentioned that because I hate to interrupt you. You can get back to the float thing because like I think that's a key
Well, one thing,
idea, is like that internet culture was something that brought all of that to a wider set of people than ever before.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
he's the. But anyway, by the way, in regards to Terrence McKenna, I highly recommend people that haven't done it to listen to him at least once on mushrooms. And when you're on the mushrooms, just go to YouTube and just randomly find a Terrence McKenna. I'm sure it'll be perfectly alignment with the message the mushrooms want you to hear. That's my recommendation. Now back to the story. Um,
I can verify all of that. That's
so
that's definitely true.
yeah, you got to do it at least once, and
He,
you'll
dude,
you'll end
he
up liking
don't
it.
you think? Like, I mean, he talked about this. He sort of said that, like, I mean, he at some point he sounds like he is the mushroom voice. Like his voice is the
Oh yeah,
voice of the
they
mushrooms.
chose him
Yeah,
specifically, I believe. Yeah, 100%.
crazy.
So prior to Joe Rogan talking about float tanks in the late 2000s with his podcast, which I think started in 2008, there was you saw all these things on like I said, altered states. And then if you knew about that weird community going on, because these were not anywhere in the country except places like California and in laboratories. They were not in spas. Okay, so Joe Rogan starts talking about all the stuff that he talks about, but floating is something that, especially in the earlier episodes, he's always talking about. And he's talking about doing edibles in the float tank, and he talks about John Lilly. And so through Joe Rogan, it gets mass awareness, and people more and more get into it, they explore it, and like every person that's floated, they want one for themselves, right? But how do
Yeah.
you? It's so hard to do it at home, and there's lots of home options now. They're not that great, to be honest, but um, everybody wants one, but they're like, how can I do this? I don't have space. I don't want to put it in my garage, especially places that have winter. Um, so they build float centers. Long story short, because they're inspired by Joe Rogan. They know the benefits of floating. They know the power and the potential, and they want to pass that on to people. They're inspired. People want to. It's like, okay, I can have my cake and eat it too. I can float when I want because I own it, but also it can, it can hopefully make me money.
Mm.
So you see this
Hmm.
huge spike from like 2008. I'd say to about 2015 is maybe the peak.
Mm.
And then, because the reason I know this is I've followed this community for years. I'm in the community, obviously. And even though, like, even though for most people, I'm like a black sheep because it's like I talk about the uncomfortable truths. A lot of things that the float industry doesn't want to have light shed on or talk about, which is fine. So, yeah, you see this huge spike, people inspired basically by Joe Rogan. And then the economy, Trump, 2018, because I went back and looked at all these accounts. I used to follow like over 1,000. At one point, there was over 1,000 in the Western world, including
Mm.
like Australia and places like that. Even Japan, almost I would consider part of Western society at this point. Um, so every place has got a float center. There's over 1,000 in the world. Big cities sometimes have 4 or 5 different float centers. And through going through my Instagram account, every once in a while I'll clean it out and say, okay, let's see who's still alive here. Because people will like die or kill themselves and it's like RIP on the page. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know that person, sorry, that's tough to hear. But I knew 3 meme creators that killed themselves over the pandemic. So
Dude.
I went back and I looked at all these float centers that had slowly but surely stopped posting or actively announced that they were shutting down. And so I saw this huge decline. And now I've been seeing it worse and worse over the past like 6 months. Because I've been wanting to talk about this on my podcast, but I just haven't gotten around to it. But like the one, like I said, the one behind me is now closed. I came by like a week after it closed because I used to live here. And I looked through the window and I'm like, oh man, it's like completely
It's
cleared out. It
dude.
truly was gone.
Why? Okay, so why is it
Then I was able to
gone?
walk through it. Like,
One thesis is people have moved on to ice baths, and I mean that, dude. Like, that's all I hear Rogan talk about now is ice baths instead of flotation. Like, it seems like there's
right.
and
Well, here's the thing.
that seems like a very different thing than a different like talk about like a spiritual
I
experience.
don't. I don't think. Yeah, I don't think ice baths have taken are the downfall. The downfall was the pandemic ruined. First of all, people that were financially weak, and I'm not just talking about float centers, but you saw who the strengths and the weaknesses were in businesses that could make it or couldn't make it. You know, they had too
Yes.
much debt going into it. They weren't run right. The chaos of the pandemic, people quitting, manpower. Well, a lot of float centers shut down right around that time, or they lasted 6 months, especially ones in California or places where, states where liberalism is run wild. The places that shut down the longest, those are
Massage
the ones that
places, spas, any place that had like close human interaction was fucked over,
right.
for sure.
And
Yeah, and then
so,
flotation seems like it's definitely in there.
and another thing that hurt the flotation industry was okay, don't stand 6 feet next to people. Oh, I'm supposed to lay in the water that this giant guy just came out of the room. I'm going to get in there after him. And so people don't realize the sanitary part of it. Like, even if there's literally a turd floating in the water, as long as you don't touch it, like the water is sanitized because nothing can live in 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt. It's like sanitized by default. But like us and like most float centers, there are regulations that are recommended. There's no law enforcing it really. Like the state, here's the other problem with float centers. There's no consistency because every state treats them differently. The state of Florida treats float centers and float tanks like a pool. A pool where, like, 50 people can get in. It's
Right.
nothing like that at all. It's nowhere near. And so a lot of places are having issues with the bureaucracy or their build out. Every float center you have to have a shower. If you didn't have to have the shower, it'd be considerably cheaper.
Mm.
But these rooms have to be uh, they have to be built to withstand corrosive Epsom salt. Now, you think something like grout's hard, but then you realize like chemistry is all weird and stuff, and it's like, wow, like things can eat things and acid and chemical reactions. Next thing you know, you've got this grouted room here. See all that grout, the Epsom salt, where the previous owners didn't clean it every day because they got lazy at the end, completely gone. Epsom salt completely ate
Ate
up
it out.
tile.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was like empty grooves. So
So
you
it's an
learn things
expensive
like that.
industry. Yeah.
Well, the thing is that's the thing to build it right. These guys, God bless them, these were two like late teen 20-year olds that built this original float center. This tank behind me was actually a homemade tank
Mm.
because this float center that, like I said, I lived at and just closed pre-existed the float center laws because it was the first one. And so this guy was running with a homemade tank for like 6 months to a year before they bought this one. So the thing is too, like they're hard. Like, for example, Epsom salt is not a fixed cost; it's always changing price. Like, like any other thing, like corn or oil. People are producing it. There's only a limited amount of it, and everybody wants it. So supply and demand. And
Mm.
then yeah, like the world
Hmm.
shuts down, you can't have access to things like that. So the pandemic killed it on a lot of levels. Weak businesses died.
It
Um,
seems like there's a
and like I
bigger
said,
market of people though that are like we would call the like seeker class, right? Like were you always in that category, like a person that was sort of like a a seeker, a person looking for like the spiritual, a person that might be delving into psychedelics? I feel like there's an archetype of especially Americans. Because what's interesting to me is watching like all of that like become a little like magnified during the Trump era, like, where you're sort of
mhm,
like, and we've talked about this a lot because like I have posters up on my wall in part because I study and think a lot about like the 60s and like the counterculture connected to like the anti-war movement and like I don't know, all the sex, drugs and rock and roll and weed stuff. A lot of it is connected to like the left and the civil rights movement and sort of like progress. When you get to the Trump era, I think this is something that kind of filtered it through the 70s, 80s punk culture into the 90s, etc. You have that kind of washed, and you don't really have like a particular politics connected to it. And so it's been interesting to me to watch sort of like Joe Rogan, especially as such a key figure in that bridge between, I don't know, left and right, whatever you want to call it. But like it's a different kind of drug, stoner, psychedelic, spiritual culture now than we've had in this country in previous generations. Do you feel that? I mean, you're a part of it, I guess.
I've had many levels of awakening exploring the psychedelic drug world, from like new age enlightenment to it's a full on conspiracy by the government to enslave people even deeper.
Right,
Right. That
right.
that Terrence
Yes.
McKenna was caught and turned into an agent. He flipped, and that's they're pushing these things to ultimately on a spiritual level to lead people away from the truth. And not only um, do I think that's part of it, but I think that just in general, anything besides, and I'm a hypocrite in a lot of ways, but anything besides full on like concentration and meditation on God is going to ultimately, like they'll say like psychedelics are a distraction, and it's a trap, and you can potentially get caught in that trap if you think that you're benefiting yourself with psychedelics and you keep using them, but then you ultimately like burn yourself out, damage your body, your mind. So they have benefits. There's also pitfalls.
Mm,
Um, but Joe Rogan kind of sits as a gatekeeper now at this point. I think he's lost a lot of credibility as a truther.
mm.
He's gone back a lot of his most at first controversial stances, like we never went to the moon, and now he backpedals and says, after he gets his Spotify deal, and prior to that, I think he starts to, and I think this happens to everybody. The more mainstream acceptance and money and attention you get, the more you want to maintain that and maybe climb higher.
Mm.
And that's, I think, part of the game is, especially at the high level, you're controlled. You don't. I don't think they let anything out. And if they do, if something does escape their matrix control, they do everything they can to spin it, buy it
Wait,
out,
who's the
get in
they?
front of it.
Is it the reptiles? Are we working on a
Well,
reptile
yeah, I mean,
thesis? Yeah.
we'll move all the way up to Satan. Let's just go all the way to the top of the inverse pyramid, right? The Illuminati eye, right? What is that supposed to be? A god, right? But who's the god?
You tell
What
me. You
G
tell
are
me,
what?
man.
Well, there's a few theories
I
on the
love
old
all. I mean, the way
Illuminati,
you play with all
Freemason.
that Illuminati iconography on the page is to me like there's a I don't know. There's partly an incoherence to it, and that's why like for me like when I hear about Rogan, I'm kind of like I don't. He's kind of a contradictory figure. I think he in a lot of ways he doesn't really have one coherent like set of ideologies, if that makes sense.
Well, no,
Uh,
of course he doesn't.
yeah.
He's whatever
He's
gatekeep he
chasing
needs
trends
to.
and stuff like that. I mean, he's been talking about if you want him to talk about like being pissed about trans stuff, he'll be pissed about trans stuff until people aren't talking about that anymore, and then he'll move on to like whatever else he's going to be. You know what I mean? Like it feels like there's a push and pull between him setting the trends and him just following them in terms of like what people are talking about, etc.
Well, yeah, I would agree. I think Joe
He's a
Rogan.
businessman. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think again, like at a certain level, with that much influence, the name of the game for these people, it's not money, it's influence. How many people can you influence? How much influence can you have to change
Mm,
the direction of people's minds? I think literally that is the most important thing, especially when you have infinite money. Like, okay, how many Ferraris do I need? How many helicopters and mansions? We're talking levels of money that aren't reported into Forbes. The
right.
Rothschilds and higher beyond the Rothschilds. Is Soros ever even mentioned on the Forbes, top 100 or whatever, 500? I don't think so. And
He's got to be
I
on
don't,
there. He's got to be on
well,
there.
not openly. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like there's people beyond rich that, it's not about money. It's
Mm,
about, for them, it's about experiences, which I think is why you get into the dark stuff because you run out
yeah.
of, you've done everything, right? You've gone everywhere. You've experienced everything you can. So what's next? Child stuff, killing,
Jeffrey
uh, you
Epstein
know,
lizard sex.
Exactly. So that's what I mean. I don't think you're dealing with people that care about money, especially when they can just print it, like
Why do you
controlling
think?
the money.
Is there a conspiracy theory behind like why cannabis is legal now? Because it's kind of insane. Like, and
Yeah,
this
to
is
make
something
men weak and gay,
that's to make men weak and gay. Wow.
to not care. And well,
Yeah.
to be less motivated. Like that's I think part of it. I
Like,
think
and
when I say
you really
weak and
think like it's
gay,
a opiate for the masses type situation where it's just sort of like let them get stoned so they won't notice how fucked up the
well, I
world
like to
is,
see it as
etc.
a double-edged sword though. I like to see it as like, yes, like for example, LSD is a good example of this. Like, okay, yes, we're gonna try to uh use this for us to brainwash people and mind control and all these other things. And but it ends up awakening a lot of people. And I sit on the fence a lot of times with LSD because I do realize the potential downfall for the wrong people, aka if you've got underlying schizophrenia, it will completely unlock it. If you have any kind of that in your background, I would highly recommend. Same thing with weed. They say weed makes you schizo too. Um, but
You think
in
that's
terms of like
true?
real, I've
There,
encountered many people that have had serious issues with LSD,
there's a case
and
right now in my county of a young woman who was like not really a big weed smoker. She was at her boyfriend's house. She smoked out of his bong a bunch of like dabs and shit like that. And she claims that she heard voices and went into like a hell world that told her that the only way for her to be alive again would be to kill her boyfriend. And she grabbed a kitchen knife and she stabbed him like hundreds of times and killed
uh,
him. And then her defense was the cannabis defense. She says the weed made her do it. And I will say, spoiler, that the jury rejected that and said they didn't believe it. But what do you think of that? Because part of me like was just sort of thinking like, I don't know. I've had difficult moments with both weed and psychedelics. But it seems like there are cases of people like completely losing their minds on this shit, obviously, right?
well, we're assuming that she's telling the truth and that's what happened to her. I'm assuming that's not the truth and she's lying, but let's assume it is. I've had my experience with psychedelics in general is they tune you into frequency relative to where you're at. So if you're having a great time, that's why they say set and setting is very important. Like if you're
Yeah.
having a bad time, yeah, a lot of times people will do psychedelics when they're having horrible moments, and it will give them insight and enlightenment as to why. And it's very helpful, even though it's at the worst time possible. But recommended, do it when you have space and time. Set and setting is so important because I do think it does tap you into a frequency relative to your own. And so, yes, you can be pulling from hell demons if you're in a lowered state,
Mm.
if you are, you know what I mean? Versus if you've done some work and you're happy, you're eating right, you're sleeping, you have a relatively good life versus, you've been traumatized or you're in a
Yeah.
very low frequency. You know what I mean? So that's
And
what
there's
I
a
would
lot
say.
of low frequency people in America right now. You know what I mean? It feels like there are a lot of people who are close to that hell world without psychedelics, and you throw that into the mix, you're going to get a lot of bad trips. It seems like.
Yeah, I've been traveling a lot around the country the past few months. Like every week is a new place, and the job I do is it puts me in the thick of everything, like in the cities and all this. So it's like I try not to see it, but I do feel like there's more despair than ever.
Mm,
More people hanging on by just a thread, and I've noticed it seems in general a collective loss of patience.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and that's the feeling I get when I go places, but I have been also pleasantly surprised in certain areas where I'm like, oh, this is just gonna be like LA was great, even though
hmm,
it gets a bad rap sometimes. But I spent 3 days and it was just like heaven with like heavenly people.
yeah,
And so I do think like you can go to New York City, you can have a horrible time, you can have a great time. It just
sure.
depends on what frequency are you dialed into as you go there. Like how much judgment are you holding against the place in terms of like your thoughts about what New York City should or shouldn't be. Because I also think that those thoughts, and again, I've discovered this floating, the stiller you are, the easier it is to kind of get your reflected reality to come back the way you want it versus a cacophony of like chaos coming out of most people's unconscious mind as they work through the day of their fears, their expectations, their judgments, and they're just speeding through the day, looking at posters and driving in their car and having conversations with people and tons of like synapses and firings and just your nervous system's going, and the floating just brings that to zero, and
Yeah.
you leave your body at some point. I'm not guaranteeing that for everybody, but you can have some very deep
Is that
spiritual, metaphysical, no drugs.
is that just kind of like this to me it's sort of like the steps are you got to forget your body and then you got to forget yourself, or like your ego. And like the first step of just forgetting your body is really really hard. And it seems like flotation tanks,
Right.
the appeal they've always held for me is that like, oh, at least it gives you that boost of, okay, my body is out of the picture now, because that is such a distraction. And it seems
Well,
like,
that's
yeah,
exactly.
the internet makes it worse, dude. And there's lots of research coming out now that everyone's talking about in terms of like what the internet does to you, even when you're not on it. because it's it's there as like another world,
Hmm.
and it's kind of pulling you there always. That to me is one of the chief distractions keeping from people from being able to access that spiritual realm you're talking about. Like what it's kind of an irony, I think, that you make a meme account in part because like you're when I
Yeah.
see float universe, it's always within this kind of constant chaotic stream of really distracting, crazy memes. I always laugh. I think that your sensibility is really funny. But at the same
Thank
time,
you.
how do you balance that in your life, I guess? Because it's sort of like you're an internet creator. At the same time, we're recognizing that this shit is fucking bringing us to the Satan zone in some way.
Well, I realize the power of the phone in terms of what has most people's eyes in the Western world during the day, especially America, which is I'm not too different than everybody else, and mine are glued on my phone like it's a crack pipe. So I'm not that bad where it like ruins my life or anything, but I'm like, you know what? I'm no different than everybody else. I might have even a little bit stronger impulse control than the average. Not saying it's great, but I know I'm on this phone all the time. And guess what? I'm always taking on unconscious filth, other people's programming,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what if I could microdose their reality with a quick shot of maybe an enlightened meme or something that's going to trigger you out of its ridiculousness about the way you're looking at the world or perceiving things. It can become very meta. I try actively to trigger at this point. For a while, I kind of played the center, which was all more encompassing. But one thing I've noticed with content is the more polarizing, the better in terms of clicks, likes, comments. So and
So
also like for
there's an
example,
impulse to troll a little bit, right? Like, I mean, one of the
well, if you can handle it, yes, absolutely.
one
It's
of the
it's
things
great. I basically it's what I do.
yeah, I saw you recently driving people crazy with the flat Earth shit, and just sort of like posting a whole bunch of flat Earth memes, and it's sort of incredible, like how people will. I mean, there are thousands of comments on your memes of people like jumping on, being like, what you're spreading is dangerous disinformation. Like people get really mad
Right.
one way or the other,
Yeah.
or
Oh yeah.
or of course there's the genuine flat earthers too who are like they're backing you
Oh,
up,
they're
etc.
they're my shooters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of. I mean, how do you ride that? Because it seems like it's a weird and funny line to me, and it's partly it seems like there is some enjoyment in watching people like lose their minds over
Oh,
weird shit
I
like
love
that.
it.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's the thing I've learned is since I haven't really monetized this to anything, it was great when I worked at the float center because it brought lots of people and attention to it. But outside of this world now, I haven't decided to monetize for any. So there's like a purity to it for me in a way
Hmm.
where it allows me. Also, I have like this thing of like no heroes, no like idol worship. I can go after anybody. I don't want to be famous. Therefore, I can always continually make fun of anything I want to, but at the cost of like being mainstream or climbing up that ladder. But
Sure.
yeah, it's about my entertainment. And if it happens, if I happen to lose 500 people over a meme, or I gain people, or I get, like you said, comments after comments, I get such enjoyment and knowledge from both sides of the argument. I try to be open to all possibilities, and a lot of times the memes are constructed in a way to trigger or trick you into revealing something about your nature via your comment. Because you're right, people will get extremely upset over pictures and words, and they're usually like SpongeBob,
Yeah.
shit like that, and I could still make people pissed off. But yeah, flat Earth surprised me because I wasn't even saying the Earth was flat. I'm saying this is not what they're saying is not what it is, and here are lots of reasons why NASA is a liar. So you should at a minimum question your reality. People get pissed about that. People want a finished, completed world. A sphere is perfect for that
Mm.
because the known world has been explored, right? At least that's what you're programmed to believe.
Sure.
And then you look at it from different angles, and then it's like, it starts to tear apart your reality. And if you're just unaware of these things and you're living a very unconscious life, it hurts to have basically your ego checked by other people's, possibilities or even beliefs that, wow, they've really gone to this idea and they believe it just as much as I believe mine. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, it's
But
also
yeah,
it's
I've got
also
lots.
just constantly asking people. I mean, what you're doing is it's philosophical in the sense of like you're asking people, how do you know what you know? You know what I mean? And like people that are like, well, I know the Earth is round, and it's just so maddening to hear someone say like, how? How do you know that? because Wikipedia told you. Like
Right,
that sort of
exactly.
thing drives people fucking nuts to sort of come to the edge of their own sort of assumptions. I don't know. For the record, I'm a round earther, but that is I don't know.
Well, I'm not, for the
I
record,
don't know
I'm
if
not,
that's
and
even.
I,
I don't even think that's irrelevant anymore. Honestly, it's kind of
well, that's
weird.
the thing. For the record, I'm not a flat earther, because it's like calling somebody a Christian. Like, what does that even mean these days? But like, so to say I'm a flat earther is why people would get upset, because that just triggers that automatically, like other words we know. But um,
Sure.
I'm like more of a realm. Like when you do as much psychedelics and see these things and go to these realms, like you realize, like one of the realizations I had was maybe a long time ago, we collectively believed it was more flatter than round, and that's what it actually was. And because
Sure.
reality at that point where you're so into that psychedelic world and you're so removed from actual reality, you realize and you think differently and you see things from different perspectives. And it's like, I'm just saying it's not how they're presenting it. My favorite theory about the earth is it's actually a sphere so big that they have to lie about, they want to keep us trapped behind an ice wall because there's other things beyond it. And it's actually a sphere. I'm not saying it's flat. I'm saying it's so large that you can't get high enough. Because one of my biggest
Right.
arguments is the horizon line in every single video I've ever seen never drops. And just think about
Mm.
like a space
Hmm.
movie when they're leaving the planet, right? The planet gets smaller and smaller, and at a certain point, the horizon line is supposed to drop. For me, that's like no vortex smoke on 9/11. They're not airplanes. I'm not saying they're not
Right.
something else. I'm
Right.
just saying they're not airplanes. When I see things like that, there's like, how do you get around some of these? That's a fact in terms of what the presentation was on 9/11, via the videos, or like that's a fact looking at these videos about the horizon line. They never drop. At a
Mm.
certain point, you should be pulling away from the planet. And yes, more of that should be revealed. So every video I've ever seen is also a fisheye. If you're not trained in photography like me, like this actual picture behind me is a fisheye picture. I took it with a fisheye. And so most of these things that are presented
Distorted.
to
Yeah.
people, oh,
Hmm.
look, it's, and they openly admit to like it's renderings of these planets and stuff. Like if you look through a telescope, it looks like you're looking at lights underwater.
Mm.
Like Saturn
Hmm.
does have rings, but it's really looking like it's underwater. And I lived on the Space Coast my entire life. Every rocket arcs, right? Supposedly the Van Allen belts are actually the dome, right? In
Right.
the Bible. What's it? The
Right.
firmament, right? So water, that's water. It's just a different kind of water that obviously we don't understand. But in terms of what I've seen with my own two eyes, they are like sledding through water with a rocket, or something's happening where they, you know what I mean? You can see it every time they do a rocket launch. It's an arc. It never goes straight up and out.
All of this makes me wonder how much the internet is just a technology to further the kind of psychedelic revolution in a way, because it's sort of like it splits reality into a way that makes sense only to a psychedelic mind, if that makes sense to you. Like it's weird that, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
right now the internet is, it's sort of the memes and the sort of self-made element of it is the access to me to that kind of mandala effect. And what I mean by that is sort of like, um I don't know, the internet as it stands right now is basically just a couple companies, right? It's just like a couple of privately owned platforms. That's it. That's what we call the internet. It's not as vast as we think it is. It's really just basically, Instagram and TikTok and a couple of other big platforms run by
Mm-hmm.
governments and private industry. But either way, it seems like the internet culture is psychedelic culture one way or the other. It took something that was
Oh yeah.
that was kind of like in basically when I was growing up, this shit existed in like raves. Like rave culture was it for weird
Yeah.
shit. And if you wanted to space out, take drugs, and talk about like how there's a hollow earth, that's only sequestered among a small population of freaks and weirdos. But what the internet does is sort of show, like, I don't know, there's sort of an impulse to take apart everything we know by everybody, even like, I don't know, true crime shit. People love true crime, and they're like, it's because everyone wants to be an investigator. Everyone wants to sort of like, I don't know, they want to know
Yeah.
things. They want to know things for themselves. I was talking to someone that was like doing a true crime podcast, and they're like said, they're successful in part because they involve their audience in the investigation. They leave all the clues on their website, and people get into it like they want to know for themselves. And it seems like part of what we're talking about here is this like unleashed thing among people to investigate the world themselves. But they're doing it like through memes on TikTok and shit like that. And it seems like, I don't know, I'm trying to sort of project how that changes our historical reality because we didn't live through that before. We didn't have this technology before. We have it now. Everyone's doing psychedelic investigations, taking apart every assumption.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I don't know. I don't know where any of it's leading, but I feel like your page sort of captures the vibe of that sort of
Well,
rush.
that's
Yeah.
yes, that's good. That makes me happy. Yeah, well, that's the
Yeah.
thing. Like, we're getting somewhere when your parents are talking about adrenochrome, right? That was a very underground thing, and I mean, even underground in the conspiracy world, there's levels to get to that actual understanding of what's really going on,
Dude, when someone
which is
told me
just
about
human.
DMT in like 1997, someone's like, "Have you ever heard of DMT?" And I'm like, "No." And it's like this thing that you can smoke and see like these lizard things or see like these
Yeah,
mantis creatures. I mean, honestly, Rogan got popular in part. It was the
that
thing that
too.
was the
That was
DMT
yeah.
clip, like that went around for years. It was like a viral clip of him on one of those other podcasts, comedy podcasts. I want to say it was like one of the SN Jim Brewer. It was the SNL guy, Jim Brewer. There was like a 6 minute clip of Joe Rogan talking about DMT. And I remember being like, whoa, like he's talking about DMT. I thought nobody, the only person that talks about DMT is like the weird guy in the back of your class in community
Right.
college that's like wearing a trench coat. Like that's it. So now, yeah, you're right. The fact that your parents are talking about adrenochrome or DMT is pretty fucking remarkable, honestly. And I don't know what it means. I don't know if it's good or bad. I don't think it's one or the other. It just is.
Well, between Twitter and like I said, all these other ones, Facebook, they are gatekeepers of basically entire countries in the world. It's a small village run out of Silicon Valley,
There you go.
but controlled by the banks because a lot of these places operate, financially upside down for years, and they're somehow, in a real market and a real, like situation where they're paying for their own, mistakes, and it's all out. I think these bankers are just printing money to run these ops. It's a
Sure.
data collection op on a massive level. And the Snowden stuff was remarkable. I'm always blown away by somebody that actually, I mean, I don't know how you feel about Snowden, but I feel like he's a hero, and he exposed a lot of things that they really wanted to keep quiet.
Those
I'd,
two
I'd like to
guys, it
believe
was
that Snowden is not an op.
Julian Assange and Edward Snowden were two of the people that were like
Yeah,
early
Assange
on.
too.
So yeah, yeah. To me, it's partly interesting like how those guys became pariahs, and sort of like so dangerous and sort of like I don't know. At this point I don't even
Well,
remember
then you realize that.
what they leaked too much. I knew Snowden's was about surveillance and Assange was about war crimes, but
Oh
either
yes,
way,
Snowden was
yeah.
huge. Snowden was basically saying every data company, including Apple, has now just running the government's running their every bit of their systems through data collection to the point where they've got databases where they don't actively record the audio, they transcribe it and they put that in a database and they say, oh, we gotta blackmail so and so here, let's look up his stuff
Dude,
and
it's worse than
type
that.
in.
It's worse than that. They're watching you. They are collecting biometric data, right? So they're watching your.
Mm-hmm.
They have technology, and I'm not fucking black helicopter guy right now. This is shit you can look up in any fucking digital, any sort of like digital discourse about like what technology is now. The ability to like read people's pupils and like how the pupils go through these like
Oh
minuscule
yeah, yeah.
like vibrations. So like in other words, they know that you're turned on like by someone texting you, like a certain person texting you gets a little bit of a
Mm-hmm.
vibration from you, so they know that person is connected to you. They are building like an AI version of you, right? Like an AI version of you that has all of the Freudian shit, all the psychological shit that you don't know about yourself is sort of built in so that they can target you so perfectly. To me, it's like I get the blackmail element of it, of like, oh, they can come after you because they know your dirty secrets, they know what turns you on, they know what you've jacked off to, etc. They can get you that way. But there's also just the everyday getting you of just bringing your eyes to the screen, which is what they need because they
Right.
need you to click and have your eyes on the screen so that they can sell that to other companies. Like the economy of it is frightening as shit. Like to me, it's like just
Yeah.
horror. But at the same time, I'm kind of like, well, this is a Pandora's box that's been unleashed. Like this wouldn't work unless people were actually hypnotized by it, and they are. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't
I
know
think like
where it's all
anything
headed.
else, I think like anything else, anything that was put out in the world, I think with malicious intent to control or subjugate or brainwash, whatever. I think ultimately, via God, however you want to put that in your mind,
Sure.
but the universe electromagnetically changes somehow. Like, I think one of the theories I have on COVID amongst many is it was a dud, meaning they thought they had this super weapon and they unleashed it, and through whatever reason, science, aka God magic that we don't understand, it kind of was a dud. That's I don't think that's my top theory, but I had that theory for the longest time. Like, well, what if they really were trying to kill a lot more people, but they just
Uh,
failed because God is
mm-hmm.
good and reality, like with LSD or anything else, but with weed even, I'm like, yes. And when I say it makes you gay and weak, I'm coming from the principle that weed overall is a feminine spirit on the psychedelic level, and it feminizes men over
Hey,
time.
that was actually part of the discourse of the counterculture in the 60s, honestly, was sort of the like weed and other psychedelics are not that weed is a psychedelic, but these kinds of drugs are
Oh no,
deconditioned.
weed is a psychedelic.
Okay,
Yes,
so
I would
they're
definitely
either
have to
way,
stop you on that. Yeah.
there was a big discourse about these like being like deconditioning agents, and one of the things they're deconditioning you from is capitalism and the values of that, but they're also patriarchy, right? They're like it's deconditioning you to the values of like a certain kind of masculine energy. There was a lot of that talk in the 60s, and it led directly, honestly, to a sort of like new age feminism in the 70s.
Right.
And yeah, I totally get what you're saying. I mean, I see the right wing um, and I don't know if I put Rogan directly in there, but I think connected, if there's anything that connects Rogan to what I would consider the American right now, it's a kind of like masculine reaction, a sort of like feeling of like, oh, like we're losing. It's like a typical story. You see this like in, you know, thousands of years of history of like that sort of like hysteria that we're like losing our men. But it's funny to see it around cannabis. Like to me, they're like, oh, like cannabis is going to make us, our men, like sort of like not be the productive sort of like men they were in
Well,
previous
yeah,
generations. Yeah.
there there's the unmotivational aspect of the stereotype, which I think unfortunately is absolutely true. As a I don't know, let's see, 2009, of like 13, 14 year smoker, like hardcore at many years in that timeline,
Yeah.
it definitely slows you down. It's just think about your house being fogged out all the time. Like
Sure.
you're just not seeing things like from the sober, clear reality, and that's just a fact. But I think it like look at the stereotype of the stoner. They're usually kind of effeminate looking, like think shaggy, think maybe even like Jesus, right? Shaggy hair, kind of thin,
Sure.
more feminine, and to a degree, I think a lot of men are over like masculine in a way, so they could use some balancing.
Yeah,
But
I
then
think
like
that's what they were
the
saying
excessive
in the
use,
60s. Yeah, like this was a good thing
excessive use
actually. Yeah.
is what turns them in long term. So I'm not saying you take a hit of weed, you're turning gay. I'm saying long term, depending on who you are, the amount of testosterone you're starting with, it will definitely, because it's taken some of the sharp masculine edges off of me over this time period. Not to say that I've cucked,
Maybe
but
that's a
there
good
are,
thing, you know? Maybe that's
well,
a good thing to
well, that's the thing.
soften
Like,
you up, you know what I mean?
right. There were ways which obviously it's helped. And I will say, I will be an advocate on both sides of
There's
pro
probably
and
a lot
con
of
of marijuana.
aggro weed smokers too, right?
Yeah. Oh
There's
yeah. Oh yeah.
definitely
Like it doesn't make everybody chill. Like one thing that's interesting about marijuana, there's this great graphic of like all the drugs, and it's got them basically into four quadrants, like stimulants, antidepressants, psychedelics, and I forget what the other quadrant is, but basically weed is directly in the middle in all four quadrants because it can be a stimulant, it can be a sedative, it can be an antidepressive
isn't
thing, it
that
can make
weird?
you depressed.
Mm-hmm.
So people use it for all different reasons, different dosage. The biggest problem I have with weed now, especially as a longtime smoker, and recently maybe 3 years of having a medical card, is what are they growing it with? What kind of pesticides? What kind of growth?
I think
Like
about that too,
promoting
especially because it's like
that you're
forty
smoking.
percent THC now. Like it's unbelievably potent. Like
Yeah.
it's not what it used to be. And yeah, I agree, dude. I mean, I live in California and we've watched actually, you talk about like the market forces. We've watched like avocado fields turn into cannabis fields here. Because it's so profitable. It's like way more
Mm-hmm.
profitable than avocado. And I don't know if that's true in every county, but it is here. And so, you know, it's industrial agriculture. It's all the kind of stuff that we watched a whole bunch of documentaries about in the 2000s to be like, oh my God,
Yeah.
factory farming is the worst thing ever, and industrial farming and yeah, pesticides and everything else. there it is in weed. And like weed was supposed to be, it wasn't supposed to be. I guess it's not, there's nothing it's supposed to be. But I guess I'm just sort of thinking a lot about the evolution of stoner and psychedelic culture and what we call counterculture from the 60s and that sort of like earth vibe, that sort of like hippie thing that like weed was supposed to return us to a place that was absent all of this industrial bullshit. But now weed is completely folded into it. Like there's no difference. Like weed isn't an escape from industrial reality. It is an industrially produced product, and one that seems like is being sold pretty hard in a lot of places. I mean, I live in California, so it's just like there's a dispensary in my neighborhood, and
Right.
it's not,
Yeah,
and
I was
they're
just
not
there.
like
Everywhere I went smelled like weed.
they're not friendly hippie earth vibe people. They're more just like straight like hustle culture business people. And that's kind of, I don't know. There's something sad
Well,
about
that's what I
that.
mean. Like, you know, I again, there's so many angles I could attack or promote marijuana. Like literally, I could sit here all day and promote it, and then the next day I could get on here all day and discredit it, put it down,
You
and
do
say why
both
you shouldn't use it.
on your page, and you drive people crazy with it because sometimes you're
People
like,
hate
oh,
that push and pull.
you're anti-weed, and you're like, weed
Well,
is the worst thing ever. And then you're like, you'll post a live video of you smoking a joint and being like, pass the booth and shit like
that's
that.
well. The thing is, first of all, I put the energy out there like I hate weed, but I never actually say it. And
Right.
that's where I trick people. I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. That's you projecting because I actually never said that. That's just how you're taking on and interpreting what I said, which is your filter, not mine. You're the one that, hates or is obsessed, or usually people that are triggered by cartoons and words, they have to, it's like, this is a way for me to say, you need to do some self introspection. And a lot of times I will get many takeaways and many points of view. It's almost like putting it into a supercomputer, but they're humans. It's weird. Like I
Yeah.
can put
Yeah.
a thought out there or a joke or an idea, and I'm not even convinced I'm right. I just want to put it out and see what the reaction is, and that helps me grow and it helps me laugh because some people people need to understand that are just listening. That it is a 100% troll page. I'm not there trying to put disinfo out. I'm asking questions and telling jokes about piss drinkers and people that ejaculate up their spine and floating naked in Epsom salt and LSD to dolphins and all this stuff. It's just a joke, but people, depending on where they're at, and I think the most enlightened people understand the joke. And it doesn't even matter if they don't believe what I believe in or believe. A lot of times I'm posting stuff I don't believe in because I think it's hysterical, or I'm posting something I actually do believe in because I think it's hysterical.
Mm.
So for me, it's 100% trolling.
Yeah, I
And
mean, to me, that's partly what I wanted to get at with you because it's sort of like it's an interesting way of using the internet, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? I do think of the internet in some ways as a drug, and you're sort of like, I'm going to use
Mhm.
it this way. A lot of people use it. I think the baseline way people use it is to sort of like display their moral values to people and sort of like be right about things. Like
Right.
I'm posting to show this is my opinion. I'm correct, but you're doing something
Virtue
very
signaling.
different. You're doing something that's subverting that form a little bit, and I think that's part of what I wanted to talk with you about, and what makes accounts like yours interesting is because it's doing something a little bit different. Like, and you call it meta. There's an I don't know. There's an intervention going on that you're doing. I don't know if you would put it that way,
Right.
but it seems like your page in part like pops out to me as one that is sort of playing with the form, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate you
Well,
talking with
thank you.
me. Yeah.
Of course, you probably relate to it on levels you don't even understand because I think about this concept all the time where you're like writing a story and you're creating characters. Make them as detailed as possible. Doesn't matter if you like what that character is or what they're doing. The more honest, the more relatable you can make the character, like the more interesting it is. And so I took that and brought that into real life. I said, well, just be as honest as possible
Mm.
because you can't be that much different from people. And maybe they're having an awakening too, or maybe they are, like you said, I can use this in different ways to
Mm.
communicate ideas and
Mm-hmm.
expand, or like use this door to open another door. And I've done that on so many levels. And so I've almost lost the account many times, especially pandemic was a weird time to be a content creator on the internet because
Oh,
at
for
a
sure.
moment's notice for the wrong speak, literally the ban hammer could come down. And I had the main account, I lost it for 3 months, but I was able to like every few weeks, like log in and like make a statement or like try to get it back. And I would always like plead like these long, funny paragraphs. Eventually, maybe it was a fan, maybe it was only like a 90-day ban. I don't know what it was, but I was eventually able to get back on. And so I've played it a lot safer since then because it's impossible to build an audience now on a lot of these platforms. Like YouTube's another one I've been trying to like get on,
Yeah,
but
yeah, it's tricky.
it's so hard on YouTube these days, especially with certain content.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sort of all over the place right now and starting a number of different little podcasts and stuff. And so it's kind of, I think it's back to the drawing board in a lot of ways. Honestly, whatever TikTok's got, the like black box algorithm that China has,
Yeah.
that's the most powerful tech in the world right now. That
I
algorithm
can't crack it.
that algorithm knows shit that we don't know, and Instagram and all the others, they want what's in there, but China won't give it up. To me, that's an interesting element of what's going on. Is sort of like one company has figured out the human mind better than all the others, and
I
we're
think you
all
know
going
what
to
the
follow
answer is,
it.
though,
Yeah,
right? I think it's the Western's progressivism that allows them, that doesn't allow them to see correctly, whatever that truth may be, that the China, whatever that, no, I'm serious, whatever the Chinese see
yeah,
as a more
interesting,
homogenous collective entity, they say
right,
Western progressives will look at something and see the truth right in their face. But like Disney's a perfect example of, like, the audience doesn't want this stop, but we're going to
right,
keep
right.
pushing the ideological button because we are convinced it doesn't matter what data or see or money or feedback we get, we are ideologically bound to die on this, cross right now. So I
Chinese
think that's what's
communism
happened
is
right
the
there.
one that somehow cracked it. I was talking about this with a friend of mine the other day. What would Karl Marx think to know that like communism's greatest technological invention is fucking TikTok, and the one that's the most popular thing that ideology has created. I'm gonna be thinking about that point you just made because why is it? Why is there an ideological reason behind the ability of whoever it was in China that created these algorithms that are so powerful and so much more powerful than the Western companies? Yeah, that's interesting. I think you could
I
probably go
think
down
it's
a rabbit hole on
politics.
that one. Yeah.
Oh, especially when you realize how literally the Chinese are based, right? They're racist, and that's okay because it's homogenous. You know what I mean? Like they're literally some of the, and I say this with love, but because the homogeneousness, whatever the term is,
Let's say
they don't have
homogeneity. Yeah, there you go.
homogeneity. Okay, there you go.
Yeah,
Doesn't matter to them. They'll call you an N word right to your face,
sure.
and they'll laugh about it because it means nothing to them. You know what I
Mm.
mean? So,
Hmm.
and then you take Western progressivism and this blindness to the truth, to
The liberal
facts,
the liberal
because
society that needs to restrain itself is not able to tap into the darkest recesses of the human mind. Is that what you're saying?
right, it's
Yeah,
just
it seems partly.
a
Yeah.
complete inability to face the truth, which is, as a large, we reject a minority oppression, which is
Yeah.
the ideological stuff of the left at the highest levels of the media and the government, which is why it's all about blackmail, and
Mm.
they're all controlled. Hollywood is a perfect example of a cult that I think at the highest levels, beyond the reptiles and the Jews, is Satan.
Sounds like you've got some memes to work on.
Yeah, right. But
uh,
I've
um,
kind of given up on these things, though.
yeah.
It's just I want to concentrate. I'm trying to go back to the beginning, which was COVID led down this opening of the account into more of conspiracy waters, which I never really tread into
Totally, dude. Are
before,
you kidding me? Like
and
anti-vax is
and
the
that
world.
created
Yeah, that was to
well
me,
that created a
anti-vax
lot
is
of
like the linchpin between all of these worlds is yeah, injections. I mean, it makes absolute sense that there would be a
mhm.
sort of hysteria, paranoia, and a sort of way in to like break the whatever kind of grip you're talking about in terms of like the nation state and companies and sort of dominance of people's minds, that it would be injections and drugs and sort of like bodily shit that would do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes total sense to me. Again, like I really don't know where all this stuff is heading, but I feel like we're at some sort of inflection point in terms of people's sort of I don't know, engagement with and belief in consensus reality. So it does not surprise me that it goes all the way down to like flat Earth and like we're gonna like look at everything, and you're
Well,
gonna see
yeah,
like a
flat
kind of
Earth is
weird disintegration of a kind of agreement of how things are, if that makes sense.
right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting the amount of Christians that call themselves Christians and they, believe in the Bible, but then when it comes to saying, "Hey, look at the Bible verses where it says, it's shaped like a seal, right? Like a wax seal. When you press that wax down, there's the continents, but then there's like the wall around the seal, right? That's what the Bible says. And it's got like the four corners of the earth in the Bible, all these other things, but it never says it's a spheroidal thing in an infinite void, like shooting through space, right? Like it's an insane thing to think about. And there's just so many things with your own eyes.
Mm.
So again, I'm not saying it's like a flat plane of existence. I'm saying it's a sphere potentially so big, and also as above, so below. It looks like your eyeball, right?
I get
Like
that.
with the continents. You know what I mean? Like if
Sure.
as above, so below is a thing, which I believe it is. I don't know about you. If it is, then maybe let's apply that to that. And that I think is probably the best example. And it's biblical. It's just so big. And maybe it's like there's realms. Like you know what? Like people are like, oh, the secret space force. I'm like, maybe the secret space force is the secret space beyond the
Sure.
ice
Yeah.
wall, right? It's not in space like Star Trek. It's in a secret space of existence. You don't need secret because you don't know about it. But there's treaties and there's reasons why you can't go in deep into Antarctica and all these places. They literally will shoot you down or take you out if you try to go and explore. I know Diplo's down there right now with his crews, but they're only letting them explore a little tip down there.
Diplo's
You know
down
what I'm?
there. I love it.
Yeah, he's doing a cruise to the
Well, I
Antarctica.
mean,
But
it's
the thing,
I was raised in Southern California, and I used to see bumper stickers by Wiccans that had the "as above, so below," sort of thing. And
mm-hmm.
it's so funny to me to hear it come out of your mouth because it's sort of like, yeah, that was always those sorts of things were always sort of hidden realm things. I don't know. In part, I guess we're
Yeah, I think
seeing the kind of marketability and the sort of desire for different perspectives, uh, and and the internet unleashing that in a really really unreal way. I don't know.
well, I'm thankful for it because it has allowed me access to overlay a lot of these belief systems and basically realize that, and especially adding my own layer of experience through psychedelics and extreme levels too in this float tank, like John Lilly levels of like floating every weekend on a couple tabs of LSD, mushrooms, all
Jesus,
this
man.
stuff. You get a different take on reality. And so what I realized was, certain parts of the Bible and all these other things, witchcraft, like there are realities to them, and they all are basically saying the same thing with different words.
Yeah,
Like manifesting reality,
yeah,
casting a spell, saying a
sure.
prayer.
Yeah.
So that
I,
was,
I have
there
a whole
is,
bunch of tarot cards next to me that for some reason I honestly, and I say for some reason it was just an inexplicable pull, partly because I think they were marketed and like sort of around during the COVID years. But I got deep into the tarot cards, not deep into like I don't know, as a spiritual practice, but more as just kind of like an iconography and a system for accessing exactly what you're talking about. And yeah, I do feel like that's something
yes.
that we're all recognizing is that there's the medium is the message in some ways, but at the same time, it's sort of like you choose your path, and your flotation tank. It seems like is a really, I don't know. I want to try it one day. I will try it one
You
day.
should.
It's
Well,
honestly the only reason I haven't tried it is partly because I'm fucking scared.
what
To
state do you
me,
live in?
California.
Oh,
So
that's
they're
right.
they
What
got to be
city?
around. Yeah, I'm in Ventura, so I'm like a
Yeah,
little
there's
north
float
north
centers
of LA.
around.
They're around. I'm more
Yeah.
scared because I'm literally the psychedelic space I haven't been to in probably like, I think 10 years. Yeah, at least October 2010 was
Well,
my last acid
you
trip. So
know,
I'm sort of like, I feel retired from psychedelic space in some ways, and I don't know if that's a good thing or not. But the
think of
flotation
this more as
sounds
therapeutic.
scary.
Think
Yeah.
of it. No, 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 no. Okay. Well, besides the fact if you're afraid of the dark and enclosed spaces, that's another level. But the thing about I tell people about the claustrophobic side, I'm like, look, with the lights off, you really can't tell how big it is.
Yeah.
Now, if you're gonna sit there, it's not like an MRI, but
Sure.
it is an enclosed space. I love it. But I will say to somebody like you that's never done it, maybe apprehensive, the closest you're gonna get is maybe like a feeling of a microdose of mushrooms. But you won't unless you're lucky, unless God has something to bestow upon you. I doubt you'll have a deeply psychedelic experience the first time, which is to kind of also lower your expectations. Because yeah, I have had mind blowing experiences sober, but
It
at the
depends on
same
the
time,
person, right? Like for some people
I
that door is wide open a lot and it doesn't take much. You know
yeah.
what I mean? Like some people will have a
Well, that's
beer
the
and they're
thing.
in it. Yeah.
Some people have that talent; they don't know about it and just unlocks it. But I can guarantee you will have a therapeutic experience physically. That's for
Right on.
everyone. That's the default takeaway: is you're going to lay in 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt. You may not leave your body, but your body's going to feel like a wet noodle when you're done. and you're going to love it. And like 99% of people would come out of that float room looking 10 years younger in the face
So crazy.
because they were able to relax, to
Mm-hmm.
shut their, like Lily invented these things in the beginning to try to isolate as much sensory input into the mind as possible, to create this perfect environment when there was no stimulation, to try to get the brain to absolute zero. Now, it's almost impossible to achieve that because you're in water. These are imperfect situations a lot of times at the float center where there might be a variable off. If the water's too cold, if, like, for example, this tank is open right now, that's behind me. If you leave this tank open while you're floating and you're there naked, a gust of wind could blow over you just slightly if like the air conditioning comes on in the room, and then that brings you back into body awareness. Whereas if you have the lid closed, it's going to cocoon you in this humidity, which again, once the air or the water and your skin are 93.5 degrees, give or take on a person, a half a degree. But once you get to that point, your body disappears. And then all kinds of magical things happen as your nervous system calms down, your mind calms down. I mean, but the guarantee is you're going to feel amazingly relaxed, even if you lay there and struggle mentally the whole time.
All right. If I do it, I promise I will do a follow up and tell everyone how it went.
Yeah,
I want to thank you, Float, for joining me. I appreciate it.
my pleasure.
Fun talking with you. I will let everyone know and link your Instagram page so people can enjoy your memes and get an idea of what the hell we're talking about.
Yeah,
But thanks and good luck with everything. And
that was
I don't
fun.
know.
Thank you.
I enjoy your stuff, and I'll be lurking there and probably yelling at you eventually about flat Earth or something on there. So I'll see you.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, man. If people want to check it out, Float Universe on Instagram is the main page. There are multiple versions on Instagram. There's levels of spicy content, YouTube being the least spicy to BitChute being the spiciest. And I do have tons of content I've created over the years without my name on it. So I'm sure you've encountered my work one way or the other.
Yeah.
But
I
yes,
love it.
as always, you are enlightened.
It's great to meet one of the minds behind the insane shit that I see on the internet that just melts me over and over. I appreciate it. Thanks, dude.
My pleasure. You are enlightened.
Well, okay, my friends, I think that's going to do it for Nostalgia Trap this week. I want to thank my guest, Float Universe. Go check out his stuff on Instagram. Go check out the Nostalgia Trap Patreon page. All of those links are in the episode description. Hope you have a great week. We'll talk to you again very soon. Bye-bye.